Welcome to Interviews with Innocence, a podcast about spirituality, consciousness, and exploring the wisdom our children bring into this world. I believe that our very young children are our greatest teachers. After all, they're the masters of living in the present moment, bubbling in unconditional love, enjoying the messiness of life, and curious about the universe in all its dimensions. The pure essence that young children exhibit lives within all of us. My hope is that these interviews will help us discover, embrace, and connect with the sacred core of childhood that resides within each of our hearts. I am your host, Marla Hughes. Hello, today I am honored to have Dr. Jill Blakeway on the show. Jill is a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, a licensed and board-certified acupuncturist and clinical herbalist. Jill founded the Innova Center in 1999 and currently acts as clinic director alongside her husband, Noah Rubenstein. As a practitioner, she is known for her intuitive approach to Chinese medicine and particularly for her skills as an acupuncturist and energy healing. Jill has written a few books, but today we are here to talk about her book, Energy Medicine, The Science and Mystery of Healing. In it, Jill describes what it means personally and scientifically to be an energy healer and draws on cutting-edge research to explain how acupuncture and energy medicine work. Hello, Jill.
Hello, Marla. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have you here. And we have a dear friend together, and that's Madhu Anziani. And we will talk about that a little bit later as we get into your interview.
Yes, he's in my book, Energy Medicine.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
He is. I interviewed him a few months ago. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that, but it's fascinating. So, Jill, what prompted you to go on this healing journey and write this beautiful book? I know you say it's very, scientific, yet it's also somewhat of a memoir for you. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when I first set off to write it, what Harper Collins wanted was a book about energy medicine that didn't take away its mystery and poetry, but gave a scientific basis for it for skeptical people or people who hadn't really thought about this area and were just sort of instinctively assumed it was very woo and out there. Yes. My interest in it, I'm an acupuncturist, so I am an energy worker. Acupuncture is a form of energy work. But in a way, I set off to explain me to me, Marla. I've always had very strong energy that comes out of my hands that people can feel. And my patients did well under my care. And I began to ask the questions that I think any thoughtful practitioner would ask, like, is it placebo? What if I have very impressive feeling energy that comes out of my hands that literally does nothing, but people are very impressed by it, and then they, it prompts a self-healing mechanism, which I think is a very valid question. And so I set off around the world to talk to healers and also scientists about what are the prompts that prompt our body to heal. And as you know, because you've read the book, I then stumbled on information that completely changed my life, because I began to understand that we are connected through a very broad field of energy that is very similar to what Chinese philosophy calls the Tao. And I had studied Taoism in grad school, but I hadn't really understood it in a very practical way, even though I was practicing as an acupuncturist. And I suddenly understood that we were part of this active field of consciousness, shared consciousness, that is the Tao, and that our physicality is really just the sort of end of that. And that we have awareness that is as large as our shared consciousness and as tiny awareness in every single cell, because every cell in our body knows who it is and what it's supposed to do, and that requires an intelligence, not an intellectual intelligence, but an awareness and a propensity to come back into balance. And that is true in the broader Tao, the energy we feel we live in, but also in our bodies. It's the bit, Marla, that we take for granted, that our bodies will, we get a bug bite and we have a histamine reaction, and, our bodies
Right.
are intelligent in their response to various stressors. So I went off to explain me to me and started to realize that I had stumbled on information that was much bigger and much more fascinating.
Right. Well, I know you talk about, you say we've seen the physiological effects from acupuncture for centuries, but you decided to dive deeper and really look at the electromagnetic force. And I know at University of Vermont, there was some studies going on. So can you talk about that a little bit? And I'm really fascinated by the embryo, how they connect with themselves, that I heard you talk about in an interview.
Yes, I am an acupuncturist, and I think acupuncturists in the West, particularly, but also in China, have wanted to explain what we're doing biophysically at the expense of looking at the energetics of the practice. So, as you say, the physiological effects of acupuncture are quite easy to measure. You can do MRIs and show that it affects the brain. You can do thermal imaging and show that it reduces inflammation. You can do Doppler ultrasound and show that it affects circulation. But I was interested in how it worked electromagnetically. And you're absolutely right. My first sort of inkling of writing a book is like following a little trail. It's like being a detective.
Right.
Really fun. But at the University of Vermont Medical School, a doctor called Dr. Helen Langerbaum had done research on acupuncture points. And what she had found, we always knew that acupuncture points on MRI look a little different to the tissue around them, only marginally, but they're much more innervated, and they have blood vessels that kind of curl around them. But she found that they had a greater pull force than other points in the body. Not a huge amount, but by about 20%. And she also found, by doing studies on rat abdominal wall, that when the acupuncture points are put in, we twist the needle to get what we call qi, de qi, at the needle, which is kind of a heavy sensation. And what is happening is that connective tissue is winding around the needle like spaghetti on a fork. And it's becoming more electroconductive. Connective tissue has a high collagen content, so it has a high water content, so it is electroconductive. But this makes it more electroconductive, and that effect lasts for the whole treatment. The tissue doesn't unwind until the needle gets taken out. So I asked myself, Marla, why? Like, why do they have a 20% greater full force? And why do the acupuncture points do that? And it turns out, I think, that the answer lies in embryology. And when we were embryos, we don't give this a lot of thought, but embryos have to communicate internally with themselves somehow. And, as fully formed people, our communication systems tend to be the cardiovascular system, proteins through the blood, or the central nervous system out into the peripheral nervous system. But embryos are communicating long before they have developed those systems. And the way they do it is they do it electrically. And there is a lovely video on YouTube called Electric Frog Face from Tufts University that shows a frog embryo creating itself, and it's like lightning going across its face. And then it turns out, Marla, that in order to do this, they create little areas of specialized tissue that are nodes that the next part of the embryo buds off from. So, for instance, there's one at the elbow, and then the forearm buds off from that. And if you compare a map of the major acupuncture points, they are at the same place as these embryological nodes. So it seems to be, I know, I said that when I was reading the research. I was like, good, because as an acupuncturist, for over 20 years, I hadn't known that. I just knew that they worked. And sometimes I didn't necessarily know why. So that was a big sort of step forward to me. But I think what it means is that the specialized tissue that was used to create us, in some ways, that created a little electrical temperature gradient, a little electrical gradient to spark off the rest of that bit of the body, it can be used to regulate us. And that is why they work. And that's why their electromagnetic properties are important. And then, as you
Yes.
know, in the book, Marla, I started to think about, I had worked in a hospital, and we were very good at giving pain relief to women in labor and delivery, which was a passion of mine, is to this day, looking after pregnant women. And we would do a point on the ankle, just above the ankle, and we could see that it dilated the cervix. We could show it in the hospital because we had all the equipment to measure. And the doctors would say to me, why? Why does that work? And I would say,
Right.
I know this is horrible, but I don't know. And now I do. It turns out now I do. Because the communication from that sort of little electrical impulse by the acupuncture needles would appear to travel along the fascia. And fascia, as you know, is having its moment. People are much more interested in fascia than they used to be, but it's everywhere in your body, and it is connective tissue, and it is highly electroconductive. In fact, it's what's called piezoelectric. It creates electrical energy. And so if you line up the meridians with the fascial planes, they are in the same place. So it would appear that a signal on the ankle reaches the cervix through the fascia. And
Wow,
by the end of writing that chapter, I was immersed in this, as you can imagine. I felt like I understood the practice I'd been practicing so much.
Right.
And then I wanted to explain it to other acupuncturists and to people, and, just generally get the word out.
Wow, that's so fascinating. So then the science part of the acupuncture, it's just so there. So let's talk about the science of other sorts of energy healing, because I know that was a little bit of a leap for you, and it kind of, but you had a couple of things happen that made you realize that this energy healing really is, it really does work. So tell us about that.
Well, I, still wondered what I was doing in the clinic when my hands would, people would feel this heat coming from my hands.
Right.
So I submitted my body to science, Mila, and I had them put an EEG on my brain and an EKG on my heart. And it turns out that what I'm doing, and I'm not remotely special, so that's what people can do, probably because I had wanted to help the patients so much. I trained my body inadvertently to have my heart and my brain go at the same frequency. And to do that, I slow down my brain a lot in the clinic. And I always joke with the patients that the diagnostic bit is the smart bit. And then I go into the flow when I do acupuncture.
Right.
And it's because I'm slowing down my brain. And then when I create what's called internal coherence, heart-brain coherence, and my heart and my brain go at the same frequency, the patient's heart goes at the same frequency as mine, which I think is lovely. And they do that thanks to something called mirror neurons. It's not actually as woo as it sounds. And they, at that point, it would appear that information gets passed one from the other. And so I realized I didn't need the needles to do the healing long before I dared try not to use them, because I thought, well, I have a license to practice acupuncture and I'm well known as an acupuncturist. So I was like, well, who am I if I'm not, using needles? But I went on a journey, and I describe this in the book, to find out if the frequency coming out of, say, Reiki practitioners or Qigong masters' hands can be measured, and it can. And in fact, Qigong masters who are particularly well trained and have a lot of experience by the time they become a Qigong master produce a frequency that is 1,000 times greater than the strongest frequency that normally comes out of the body, which is the heart. And it's a very low frequency. And interestingly, at the time I was discovering this, because ask and you shall receive information, I feel, I had a patient who I was extremely fond of, who broke both his legs in a skiing accident. And I visited him at home, because obviously he could not hobble into the office. I would put the needles in and his legs would shake. And he got better remarkably quickly, and surprised all his doctors, and he healed, given his age, extraordinarily quickly. And I realized that the best orthopedic hospitals also put electrical energy through bone to heal soft tissue and bone. And it is the same frequency that Qigong masters and Reiki masters are emitting. So we all just need to talk to each other, because we all have pieces of is what it is.
Absolutely. And do you think that, as I'm listening to you, I love all of the exercises that you give in your book that people can just do on their own and to help heal themselves. What do you think the implications could be if we, or maybe you're doing some of this already, for children, for them to learn how to self-heal emotionally, even physically? I mean, that just seems like that would have such huge implications for.
Well, I put exercises through the book, Mila, because I wanted people to know that anyone could do this. I had a section in the book on charlatans, and one of the things I found was that for the most part, the people I was most concerned about weren't people who were faking having a gift. They were people who knew how to do this and were using it to manipulate and have power over other people. And so I realized that the way out of that was to explain that I'm not remotely special, but also that we can all do this. We're all special.
Right, exactly.
And then you have the power, you can do it yourself. So that's why I gave exercises in the book and things like that. And I think this form of healing, which is so ancient and which has stood the test of time, is available to all of us. It can't solve everything. And for that reason,
no, of course not.
Poo-pooed in some ways. But what it can is prompt your body's awareness, that cellular awareness we were talking about earlier on, to, each cell to remember where it is and who it is and what it is. And I think one of the messages that of the book is that we are all connected. We are literally a shared consciousness in the Tao that is individuated into the physical. And I feel that if children understood that earlier, that would make a big difference to how we project and how we other people. It would make a huge difference to the way society becomes so fragmented. And I think if children understood how much we communicate through that field, so for instance, at the University of Connecticut, they put two separate people in separate MRIs in different rooms. And when one thought healing thoughts about the other, their brainwaves synced and they could see it on MRI. Well, we can do that. And so we can put very positive energy out there. We can put very negative energy out there. And people can feel it, and it affects people. And it also affects our relationship with collective consciousness, with what I call source energy, with God in some ways. And so, the more frightened and anxious and angry you get, the tighter you become and the less you're able to do this work. And the more loving and compassionate and open you are, the more expanded you become, the more in line with that consciousness, that collective consciousness you are, and the more that intelligence, that awareness works in your life. And I would love to work with kids, I think, about that.
This reminds me a little bit. I interviewed Karen Newell about sacred acoustics, and she was talking about exactly the same thing when your feet works. And actually, I have a question for you a little bit later about when you're feeling love and compassion, or you're feeling fear and anger. Other people around you, they absorb that, and it carries out into the world. So wouldn't it be beautiful if before school started, or breakfast started, or scratching the back in the morning started, and just have a child, to start with some exercises like that? It just could be so beautiful. So just to segue a little bit, and it kind of goes hand in hand what we were just talking about. Princeton. I know that there was a study at Princeton that really was kind of profound for you. So can you tell us about
Well,
that?
it is actually a continuation of what we're talking about. I began to
Yes.
understand that we could connect in clinic, that my patients were starting to have the same frequency of heart frequency as me and things like that. So I could see that that was measurable. But I tell this story in the book in chapter 2, but at physics, in the engineering department at Princeton, which I always assume is the least woo department at Princeton.
I
I
would
assume
think
that
so.
those are the people who are actually making physical machines. They had a grad student, a female grad student, who wondered if she could make a machine that could be affected by the human mind. And they didn't think for a moment she'd pull this off, but she did. And to cut a long story short, she, thanks to decaying atomic material, she created a machine that spits out random numbers. And what she found is that when people focus on it with intention and feeling, those numbers become less random. And if a lot of people with the same feeling focus on it, those numbers become less random in a way that is statistically impossible. And in the engineering department, they were so blown away by these frankly anomalous results that they set up a lab called the Pear Lab, which ran for quite a long time to do research into this. Because obviously, if you can use your thoughts and your feelings to change a machine, you can use your thoughts and your feelings to change other physical things too and change reality.
Absolutely.
And so they created these little random event generators, is what they called. They created portable versions of them, and the work continues. It's now run by a foundation called the Global Consciousness Project, and they've taken them to the Trump inaugural and yoga retreats and things like that. And what they have found is that the biggest connector is love and compassion. And when people share love and compassion, that really does have a profound effect on the machine statistically. But fear is not far behind. So when people connect in fear, which is such a contractive energy, it also affects our reality. It affects the machine. And I thought that was an important thing to talk about, because we live in very fearful times, and that contractive energy, you see it work on a national level. I've seen my own country, Britain, become much more fearful and contract on the world stage. I've seen that happen in America where I live. We need to be aware that fear affects other people and our reality, and it spreads a bit like a virus.
Right. And the story about 9/11, that was really fascinating.
Yes.
Could you
well,
you have so many great stories.
Yes, they had these REGs all over the world at universities spitting out numbers back to Princeton as part of their Pear Lab studies, just seeing what would happen, really, and looking for patterns and things like that. And on September the 11th, 4 hours before the planes hit the Twin Towers, all over the world, the REGs started to become less random. And that went on for the whole of that day. And people always ask me, why 4 hours before? And the truth is, I don't know. It's often used to discredit this research, but I don't think it should be. I think it's either a sort of collective premonition, or the fact that time is not really linear. That's a construct. Or, in fact, that the terrible crimes that were about to be committed were already in process. These people were already driving to the airport. They were already, they'd already set off. So this whole thing was in motion. It's just that nobody knew. And I think it's possibly a combination of those three, although I'm no expert on that kind of thing, so I don't know. But that was their finding, that when the whole world looked in the same direction with great compassion, it showed on the REGs all over the world.
Yeah. Wow. So let's talk about sound healing a little bit. You have Madhu Anziani in your book, and I interviewed Madhu a couple of months ago, so I encourage my listeners to go back. It was an amazing story. So Could you share that with us, please?
Well, a lot of this information starts to come down to how information is carried on a wave. And of course, sound is a wave. And, in the book, I looked at some of the most ancient mantras and how they affect different parts of the brain. And you can show it you can make people sing mantras in an MRI and show sound.
Love it.
Different parts of the brain, which is so interesting. And I'm always interested how ancient cultures came upon things that we can now see are extremely worthwhile. And, that we all arrived from different frames of reference at the same points fascinates me, because I practice Chinese medicine in the West as a Westerner. So it always blows my mind. But Madhu, I was looking, to look at this from a patient's point of view. And as I'm sure Madhu told you, when he was interviewed, he had a spinal cord injury. He fell out of the window when he was in college, and he was told that he would be tetraplegic. And Madhu lay in the hospital, and he made a sound. And he felt it through his body, and he had enough presence of mind, and he was only 23 at this point, to know that if he could feel it, then he had some nervous system left. And he started to tone and sing mantras, and someone bought him a Tibetan prayer wheel, and his father would hold him up and move his arm. And over time, he managed to heal his spinal cord injury. And I liked this story because he didn't do it alone. I wanted to move away from this magical thinking around energy medicine. There was no doubt that Madhu had great surgeons. He was in San Francisco at UCSF. He had physical therapists. He had really good nursing. He had a very supportive family. But the thing that made the difference in Madhu's case was that he created vibration via sound in his body, and that created connection. And the other thing that struck me about Madhu when I interviewed him was he said, various people told him that he should just accept, being a tetraplegic so he could get on with being the best tetraplegic that he could be. And he said to me, I wasn't stupid, Jill. I knew that I would probably end up in a wheelchair, but I never allowed that belief to permeate my being, and I tried to live in joy. And that is a direct quote. And I was blown away by the presence of mind that took for a 23-year-old college student to make a decision not to let his diagnosis permeate that deeply without being in denial about it, and to still, in that really horrible situation, choose to live in joy. And so I always think of Madhu's recovery as being part a miracle of modern medicine, part an extraordinary example of how sound creates connection, how that wave created by sound creates connection in the body, and in particular the nervous system, and part about how your own attitude and your own beliefs affect your healing. So I think he's a wonderful young man, and I was really happy to tell his story in the book. And he is, of course, now a sound healer, as you would be if you had this profound experience. So you can go and find Madhu Anziani online and listen to his beautiful music, and what a gift he is to the world.
Yes. And he also is a shamanic practitioner. And you have said that this journey of yours, it's very much like a classic shamanic journey. Can you elaborate?
Well, the shamanic journey traditionally has its struggles, and out of the struggle comes, comes some wisdom, and much of it is internal and a sort of self struggle. And I tell my own. I want to be very honest about myself in this book. It's partially memoir, and I sort of discuss my struggles and what I wasn't very good at as a practitioner, and how I learned, which was often the hard way, unfortunately. Right. If there was a painful way of learning a lesson for a long time, I learned it that way.
Me too.
And also it necessitated deep reflection. And I think if you look at, say, Jesus and the Buddha, one of the noticeable things about both their stories is that they went away for a while and came back wiser. They went
Right.
inside themselves. And I think the meaning of that is, at some point I kept taking courses and I kept, trying to learn and reading books and thinking. And eventually you work out that this is already in you. But to do that, you have to be quiet and you have to shut out a lot of the noise in our day-to-day lives and the pressures. And, so I think of Jesus going away to the wilderness, or I think of the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree. And I realized that they were on a deep journey to realize, oh, I am a little microcosm. I am a microcosm of the macrocosm. And I think it dawns on people. It took me ages, but it dawns on people at different times. But what I realized is that in my training, you're always taught in Chinese philosophy that human beings are the connection between heaven and earth. And because I'd had a traditional Judeo-Christian upbringing, heaven was a long way away in my mind. It was,
Right.
past clouds, clearly up. And so I didn't really understand how we were the connection, but I sort of, went along with it. But as I worked with people and as I worked on myself, I began to realize we are physical bodies nourished by the earth. We're really only physical because we're on the earth. We have rippled out of the Tao, the vast field of intelligence, into the physical, and we will ripple back down at some point. And we are filled with awareness. And we've talked a couple of times about cellular awareness. We are filled with awareness. We have consciousness, and we mistake that consciousness for our mind all the time. But when we're quiet, which is why we need to do introspection, if you meditate, after a while you can watch your mind, and it eventually dawns on you to ask, I wonder who's doing the watching then. And the person who's doing the watching is a consciousness that is part of something greater. And so you start to not see the separation in the same way. And I think that was, really the heart of Jesus's teaching. And obviously, people use it to feel separate the whole time, because that's human beings. We
that's human beings
to experience duality, and then we kind of hate it and we other each other and do all that stuff, which I totally understand because I'm human too, and I do it as well. And it was at the heart of the Buddha's teachings, was this lack of separation. And the reason that Jesus could perform miracles was because he had completely transcended this separateness, this separate self. And I met people who weren't necessarily Jesus, but I met healers who also were very well on their way to transcending that idea of a separate self, particularly when I went to Japan. And in the book, I head off to Japan to meet some really interesting healers, a monk called Hiroyuki Abe and a yogi called Master Kawakami. And both of them had, both of them were lovely, lovely human beings, just full of warmth and compassion and kindness. And they immediately made people feel safe. But a lot of that came from their lack of judgment, which came from their lack of a separate self. And that's
no ego.
Consciousness. So that is sort of what I learned along the way. And that is the shamanic journey. You struggle the whole way. Life whips you around. And then eventually you decide to go inwards rather than looking outward.
It is really interesting to think of. I think of sometimes getting off the stage and just watching, when you say just watching the story, watching the drama go by with a quiet mind.
Yes.
So can you tell us about you and Neil Donald Walsh, the author of Conversations with God? I know he counseled you on spirituality and healing, and I'm just fascinated about about that relationship. I just love that book that he
Neil
wrote.
is an extraordinary man, and I tell this story in the book. But I am in the middle of all my struggles. I started an acupuncture practice in New York, and New York is a brutal city. And I had just thought that if I showed up with an open heart and helped people, that the world would pile in to support me.
Right.
And of course, that is not quite. And for a while, I was so boundaryless that I was ripped off at every corner. And I once had an office manager who stole $10,000. I mean, I was just like, I was lost, and I was angry and miserable. And I decided that I would make a documentary about God. And this is of looking externally for what is in fact internal. So clearly I was in no position to make a documentary about God at all, but I thought it might help me which is highly self-centered, and I rang the lovely Mr. Walsh and explained to him that I wanted to make a documentary about God, and I thought that
I love this.
as he had an actual conversation with God, that maybe I should ask him some questions. And he very sweetly said to me, do you need a mentor? I think he knew straight away that I was in no position to make anything profound about God at all. And I do. And so, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, which is also part of the shamanic journey. And Neil counseled me during a really difficult part of my life, and I grew hugely from his teachings. And he really one of the things I was actually just telling my team today, funnily enough, now I have 28 acupuncturists and almost 50 staff.
Wow.
Back then it was just me. But he used to always ask, what would love do in this situation? And it's such a good question in business, particularly, because love is a very expansive energy and fear is a very contractive one. So what would love do? And love would, love isn't always mushy. Love doesn't always look very kumbaya. Love occasionally helps someone go to the next journey on their, the next part of their journey, and not stay on your stuff. But there's a way of doing it. So I often think of Neil's words, I reread Conversations with God before I wrote this book again. And I was amazed by how far I'd come on this journey, that it was like a different book to me. You know that feeling where you read something the first time, you get a lot from it, and then you revisit it like 20 years later, and you're like, oh my goodness, how did I not even see this?
Wow.
Yeah. So if you haven't read Conversations with God, people listening at home, it is a wonderful book.
It's amazing. And I know that Neil's, I can't remember the exact words, but something about being the greatest, grandest
version of yourself.
Yes. So
I often say that to my team too. I should pay lovely Neil royalties, because I often quote him. I do. He wouldn't mind. He would be glad I was passing it on. But I often say this to patients, because people feel very stuck. And Neil bears this very lightly, and he's always like, well, you can just create the next greatest and grandest version of yourself. And I remember the first time he said it to me, I was like, I can. I should never have occurred to me that life was so creative, that I felt stuck, and I have to do this, and I can't, I'm in deep obligation and things. And the thought that I had the freedom to just decide to be the next greatest and grandest version of me, and that I could grow just because I decided to, had never entered my head. Nobody had ever taught me that until Neil said that. But it is
just those words.
Isn't that great?
I just heard you say that in an interview, and I love the words, be the greatest, grandest version of yourself.
It's like you're like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. You can just shed off your cocoon. And step into the next greatest and grandest version of yourself.
What a great mantra to wake up with.
Or have it all worked out, or even know what that greatest and grandest version is going to do. You can just be. And that will change the energy around you, and the universe will come to meet you.
Yes. So we need to wrap it up, but what would you say from struggles now to, I mean, I look at your bio and all you're doing, and it's just so amazing and inspiring. What have you learned? What have been your greatest lessons?
Um, What have I learned? The reason I'm hesitating is I feel like I have so much more to learn.
Yes.
I don't feel particularly wise at all. I have learned that in the clinic, I've learned that people heal when they feel safe, and that all the good healers I met created safety for people. And we live in a culture that doesn't prioritize that. And you know, thanks to a lot of ego projection, makes the world somewhat unsafe for people. And I have just, you know, people heal, they unwind their trauma when they feel safe. I've learned that we store pain in our bodies, in our energy fields, in little pain bodies, and then we're very unconscious of those pain bodies. And part of my job these days, I do a lot of it on Zoom, and I literally just help people move their pain bodies, because if we don't let them expand, they have a story attached to them that runs us. And I often, you know, listen to that story, and it usually ends up with I won't survive, because it's usually from childhood. So it's like, if I don't do what everybody wants, then nobody will love me and I won't survive. Or, you know, that's an abbreviated version of it. So I do a lot of that. So I've learned that. And I genuinely now understand that we are the connection between heaven and earth, because we embody consciousness, and that we rippled out of the Tao, and that our loved ones and we ripple back into the Tao, but their energy, their consciousness does not leave. You know, energy is transformed. It doesn't end. And so the part of us that makes us alive is our consciousness, our awareness, and that continues. And it has given me great peace. I think being scared of losing people you love, and, you know, I'm still scared, obviously, because I'm human, but, or scared of dying yourself and ending. I think I've been much less fearful since I realized, oh, I'm just a little ripple in the Tao, and I will ripple back, and all will be well.
Yes. Has it changed the way, I'm sure it has, just how you personally, Jill Blakeway, walks in your life?
Yes, I'm much less reactive than I was. Writing this book changed me. And it was very good preparation, actually, for what's happened recently, because, you know, our centers have had to shut down in New York for 3 months due to COVID. We didn't fire our stuff, so it was extraordinarily expensive and precarious to do that. And I think I would be much more scared if I didn't know I was just a little ripple in the Tao.
Right. Very good point.
It's been one long serenity prayer, this whole coronavirus situation, if you're running a business in New York. And I have focused on the things I can control, which is helping patients on Zoom. And I've completely let go of the stuff I can't. And I don't think I'd have been able to do that before I wrote this book.
Right. Well, Jill, thank you so much for today. I know you're a very busy woman, and this has just been a joy, and just thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. Thanks for asking such interesting questions. That was a really fun chat.
Yes, you're very welcome. And hopefully I'll make it out to one of your centers one of these days. I would love that.
We would love to see you.
Yes. Well, thank you. And if people want to find you, what's the best way?
You can find me at YINOVAcenter.com, YINOVA Center, spelt the American way.com. And I'm still just a practitioner. I like treating patients. So you can find me in my office doing what I've always been doing, which is looking after people. And we have a lively blog over there, and we have lively social media. My colleagues are massively smart and interesting. So come and find us.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much, and you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care.
Okay, thanks, Jill. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening in today. If you want to learn more about the show, you can find us at interviewswithinnocence.com and on Facebook or Instagram at Interviews with Innocence. Please write me a message, tell me what you liked, and let me know what else you would like to hear. I would love to hear from you. And if you liked what you heard, please leave us an iTunes rating and review. It helps other listeners find the show. Thank you.